Hi, it's Stephen here, author of Ho'oponopono, What Is It? Can It Help? And What Are Its Limitations? I wasn't going to make a video today, but I decided to combine a couple of ideas. The first idea came in a blog post that I made a day or so back, and which I'll use to support this video. And the second idea came from an advert I saw on Facebook and then clicked through to discover what it was about. And it's all about why a prehistoric stegosaurus appears on the carvings of a temple in India, I believe. It's really quite a fascinating question. So to answer the first part is, why does the stegosaurus appear in the carvings of an Indian temple? So objectively, I can't give you a reason for this. Archaeologically, I can't give you a reason for it. But inspirationally, I can give you a reason for it. And it all has to do with the content of this video. You see, the ancient Kahunas of Hawaii, the elders, the wise people, were very specialized. They weren't like the kinds of people that we meet today walking down the street in Western society. They were incredibly talented, but they wired their perception quite differently from how we do it today. Indeed, in a sense, we're at a disadvantage compared to those ancient peoples, because since the time of Descartes, the French philosopher, we've adopted the idea that most of the world is mechanical, and therefore only we humans have what's called sentience, the idea that we are alive in some way, and not only are we alive in some way, but we're more important than everything else that we see. Descartes didn't actually say this, but people that have taken his writings have interpreted in that kind of way. Descartes is very important to Western society because out of Descartes we have developed all of the current technologies that make up our Western world today. But the downside of Descartes is that we've also made up all the kind of evils of the world, if you like, the mechanized warfare, the systems that generate profits and make profit the primary motive for everything that we do. The toys that we all have, such as cars and watches and airplanes and yachts and bigger houses, and the drive that makes us want to get them. Now you see, the ancient Kahunas or elders, they weren't like this at all. They simply took from the land what was necessary, and they put back as much as they gave, and they didn't have to recycle things in the way that we recycle them. And most of the things that they used were biodegradable. Very few things were actually made out of metal. Most things were made out of biodegradable materials. So, first of all, their world was very different. They saw themselves very much part of the world, and they also saw themselves and the world as being part of something that was far greater than them. You could say that they were was somebody who in Western civilization today may have taken LSD or magic mushrooms or one of those kind of psychedelics that have broken down some of the walls of perception that most people tend to have. The Kahunas didn't really need all of these drugs. They kind of experienced their world like that to some extent all of the time. I guess today people might think that they were crazy. And some of the founders of Ho'oponopono have been thought by other Westerners to be kind of crazy. Dr. Hugh Len was thought of as schizophrenic by some people. Morna Nalamaku Simeona, the founder, was also thought to be crazy in some respects. Others simply say that she was psychic, but I think really she was actually none of these things. She was simply operating out of a traditional elder Kahuna mindset. Let's talk a little bit about the blog post that has inspired this, the Kahuna's worldview. Well, I'm going to have to reveal a little bit about myself in order to do this well. I was up in a town where pretty much everybody was experimenting with drugs. I was quite fortunate in a sense. Naturally, I came across drugs as I was growing up, but I didn't experiment with them in any way, because what I discovered very rapidly was that people that were taking drugs such as LSD and other illegal substances attributed all of their changes of perception as being associated with the drug rather than being associated with themselves. It was like the previous generation had been addicted to alcohol. There was something like 42 pubs in the little market town where I was brought up. And that gives you some idea of the importance of alcohol within that culture. So the previous culture was to get drunk all the time, and the new culture came in, which was to do with drug experimentation, and people tended to experiment with drugs and get high in the same way as the previous generation had got drunk. There wasn't anything spiritual about this at all, but I always thought that drugs were incredibly spiritual. And then very rapidly, through my work, I discovered something called Humanistic Psychology, mainly through a book written by a man called John Rowan called Ordinary Ecstasy. And he more or less produced this himself. It was like a text that he typed, and it had been sort of mimeographed, and then RKP hadn't even bothered to typeset it. They'd just kind of taken the mimeograph and reproduced it as a book. It's better produced these days, and you can buy it on Amazon.co.uk, and you'll find the link to it in the article which is on the website which supports this video. Anyway, humanistic psychology aimed to get you to the same places as taking drugs, but without the drugs. So, if you like, I became addicted to humanistic psychology and discovery and Carlos Castaneda and all of those kind of worlds and things pretty early on in my 20s, and it's a kind of fascination that hasn't left me at all. And so from this, and from practicing psychotherapy for many, many years, and also meeting very ordinary people through social work before psychotherapy, many, many years as well, I really get both a feeling for what it is to be poor, what it is to be a human being, what it is to be rich, what it is to be disturbed, what the problems of today's world are. And as a result of that, when I discovered Ho'oponopono, I really felt that the model of the psyche that was offered there merited further investigation. And the more I looked at it, and the more I considered what Ho'oponopono does for people, the more I came to the conclusion that it is the right track to go. Anyway, our ancient Kahunas were kind of graded. So the really good ones would have this ability to see themselves really deeply embedded in nature. They would feel themselves to be also part of another world, and they would be able to travel to places in their dreams and even in their awakened life, in their perceptions, and see things beyond the normal horizon of time. And this, I believe, is really why or how this stegosaurus came to be in an Indian temple. It wasn't really to do with Ho'oponopono, but it was to do with the fact that the stonemasons in temples were also subject to ancient knowledge, like the Kahunas were subject to a special kind of knowledge and reality. So we know, because of the way in which modern Freemasonry works, that there are people that base certain rituals upon what has occurred in the past, and yet somehow or other there's a disconnect between these rituals and what's actually going on. It's like learning a dead language, if you like. You can speak Latin, but it doesn't actually make you a Roman. And I think that's kind of what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that the Kahunas were not the same as Western people because they were wired up differently. You can do any amount of Kahuna rituals, but unless you're wired up in their kind of way, then it's very, very unlikely that you're going to get the same results. Indeed, maybe you can even harm yourself. So using Ho'oponopono in order to gain more material things, because that's our world, is not useful. The crazy people, the people that normally we would find on sort of bus stops or who you would come across in everyday life, are much more likely to be similar to your Kahunas than somebody who's mega rich or mega successful in a Western sense of the word. I hope I've kind of answered the question as how did this stegosaurus get into this temple? I think what happened was that the ancient stonemason was able in his dreams to travel far and wide across the universe and backwards and forwards in time. And he travelled back in time and he saw a stegosaurus and he thought, well, this is an interesting animal. I will carve it in the temple. And I think the reason why there's only one in the temple is that his dream was personal to him. It couldn't be validated by other stonemasons working in the temple. Quite simply, they said, well, you can have one, but you can't have more than one because we haven't seen it anyway. This is a traditional temple, and therefore we're going to put traditional symbols within it. I think that's the answer to the question. Intuitively, I know that's the answer to the question, but I can't prove it. It's a story, just like most other stories that come out of Ho'oponopono, yet they do great good for the people that listen to them. Thank you very much for watching. You have a great day, and I look forward to making more videos for you.